Hi, I'm Mike. I'm here today to talk to you about D3, just to show you a little excerpt of a lecture that I did recently talking about how to approach D3 and make it easy to use. It can be complicated, and the perception is generally that it is a difficult thing to do with a steep learning curve, but if you take your time and you approach it slowly, then you'll find that it's actually very pleasant to use and amazingly powerful, and you can do some great things with it. Okay, so let's get going. So let's have a look at an example, a little code pen that I have here. I was looking around for an example to use and I found this one. It's not my code, but it's not complicated either. There is some HTML, which you see here. And basically the core of this is there's a title which says a simple snowman, and then an SVG element on the page of 500 by 500. The CSS is very simple. There's just one element dot circle, one class. So I'll shrink those up. They're kind of not important for the moment. And then we'll have a look at the actual code itself. C1 is a variable, and basically it's declared as a circle, an SVG circle, and then there are attributes. So the CX is the central point X and the Y coordinate, and then the radius. It has a stroke which is black, a width and a fill. So if I changed it to be red, for example, you would see that that circle then becomes easy to see that that's the actual circle that we're drawing. Now this code is quite repetitive because it basically then says, well, okay, I'm going to draw another circle and I'm going to spell out each of the attributes on it. So let's say that we change this one to blue so that we can see which one that is. And you can see that that's the second one. So C2 is actually another circle at a different X and Y and a different radius. And that continues with C3 and C4. And those are the two eyes. So this is really simple, but it's not making the best use of D3 and its data-driven capabilities. So what we'll do is I rewrote this code. We'll switch over to that and we'll have a look at how I implemented that. So this is the second code pen, yep. The HTML is the same, the CSS is the same, so we can collapse those. In fact, the CSS is slightly different, but never mind. And what I've done is I've basically defined this block of data called circles. So I've defined each of the circles of the snowman with their X and Y coordinates, a radius, and then a color. And then what I do is I basically have this, I draw an SVG element and I say it's a dot circle, and I use the circles array as the data that feeds it. So there is this dot enter and then dot append. So when you first come into it, it will then append a circle for each and every one of these array elements in the data. And then it goes through and it sets the class to be circle, it sets the CX to be the data element CX, the Y, the radius, the stroke is always grey, the stroke width is 3, and the fill is white in this case. Okay, so that's fairly simple. So if I comment that out, for example, you can see that the circles all disappear. So they're not there. Okay. So flicking back to the previous example, you can see that this is quite verbose, and it was laborious to set up all of the attributes on each element. And this one basically in one block of code can do everything, and it automatically iterates through the data that you supply it. So what we've managed to do now is streamline our code, and it means that there's one block of code that does everything and it's data driven. So Mike Bostock would be happy with us at this point, but let's go a little bit further. You'll see that I've also added in color attributes to this data. And I'm going to make use of a thing called function chaining in D3, and that's been going on already. So basically this SVG element, we do a series of operations on it. So we're basically setting attributes as we go along, all these various attributes, and then I'll go down, I've written the code, it's a bit like a cooking lesson that I've gone ahead, and I can uncomment this one to say, okay, we're actually going to set the fill color based on the data value that came in here. So you can now see that the two eyes are different colors. All right, and then my next step is to say, well, let's do some more data-driven stuff to say, let's define a names array. We're going to call him Snowy the Third. We've got some X and Y coordinates. So what I've done is I've set the X value to 550, which is actually off to the right. So the name is there, but you can't see it. So I'll change that to 150, and you'll see that that brings that back in. And what I've done here is I've basically, with that name, I've said, right, I'm going to draw a rectangle. I'm using the names array for the data. And when I come in with that data the first time, I'm going to append a rectangle. I'm going to give it a width and a height, an X and a Y, a stroke width and a fill. And then I'm also going to put in this text element here, and again use the names, and I'm going to append a text element, SVG element, and I'm going to give it X and Y that are inside the actual box that we drew before, and I'm going to center it around that point. So you see, that's how you can actually then start to build up a more complex drawing, and again just using data. So for example, if I did this and I put in Snowy is cool, I need to put a comma on that. I could then, that's written on top of each other, so if I just change the data and say let's push the Y down a bit, then you'll see that that's further down, and I'm maybe gone a little bit far, so let's try 400. Okay, so there you go, that's how you add a name. And then let's have a look at drawing a nose. And again, I've done this ahead of time, and it's off the page. In fact, you can just see the nose there. So I'm going to bring that back in by changing that to 100. And you notice that there's a little nose there, sort of lime and yellow nose. What I might do is actually change, because the nose is defined in the CSS here. So I've got this fill is yellow and the stroke is lime. I can then actually override that by supplying attributes to it. So let's say I want to make it brown and orange to make it look more like a carrot. But it doesn't work because this is defined in the CSS unless so we need to use the .style to do it. So what we'll do here is we'll actually change this way using the style, and then you'll see that it does affect it. And then what I'm also going to do is get a little bit fancy and put in a transition so that the nose actually animates into place. So you see, D3 isn't that complicated. It's just made up of building blocks. So as you put the blocks together, then you can make it do amazing things. And it doesn't have to be hard. It takes a little bit of patience to learn it, but it's definitely worth using because you can do something special as opposed to standard cookie cutter charts.